Historical of Vietnam. The conquest of Vietnam by France began in 1858 and was completed by 1884. It became part of French Indochina in 1887. Vietnam declared independence after World War II, but France continued to rule until its 1954 defeat by communist forces under Ho Chi Minh. Under the Geneva Accords of 1954, Vietnam was divided into the communist north and anti-communist south. U.S. economy and military aid to South Vietnam grew through the 1960s in an attempt to bolster the government. But U.S. armed forces were withdrawn following a ceasefire agreement in 1973. For the next one is government and economy. Vietnam's main exports include crude oil, seafood, rice, shoes, wooden products, machinery, electronics, coffee, and clothing. Between 1975 and the late 1980s, Vietnam traded mainly with other communist countries, but since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1990, it has expanded trade with other nations. Besides that, people and culture of Vietnam, most Vietnamese people live in the countryside, mainly in the river delta regions of the north and south. Recently, people have begun to move to the main cities of Ho Chi Minh, formerly Saigon, and Hanoi. The most popular sports in Vietnam include soccer, table tennis, volleyball, and martial arts.
Firstly, introduction of Vietnam. Vietnam is a long, narrow nation shaped like the letter S. It is Southeast Asia on the eastern edge of the peninsula, known as Indochina. Its neighbors include China to the north and Laos and Cambodia to the west. At its narrowest point, Vietnam is only 30 miles or 48 kilometers wide. Two of Vietnam's largest rivers, the Mekong in the south and the Red in the north, and at the South China Sea in which swampy plains called deltas. Most Vietnamese people live in the countryside, mainly in the river delta regions of the north and south. Recently, though, people have begun to move the main cities of Ho Chi Minh, formerly Saigon, and Hanoi.
Background political. The politics of Vietnam are dominated by a single party, the Communist Party of Vietnam, CPV. The President of Vietnam is the head of state, and the Prime Minister of Vietnam is the head of government. Both of these are separate from the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam, who leads the Communist Party and is head of the Politburo and the Central Military Commission. Thus, the General Secretary is the de facto supreme leader of Vietnam. Executive power is exercised by the government and the President of Vietnam. Legislative power is vested in the National Assembly of Vietnam. The judiciary is independent of the executive. The parliament adopted the current constitution of Vietnam is 5th on 28 November 2013. Political issues in Vietnam. Communist Party is in charge of Vietnam, a one-party state. In the political system, the People's Army of Vietnam has a considerable impact, despite being guaranteed by the Constitution the right to free speech, opinion and expression is not always effectively upheld. Vietnam's vibrant civil society and social media face increasing restrictions affecting both informal actors such as bloggers and legally registered non-governmental organization NGOs. Human rights remain a contentious issue in the US-Vietnam relationship. For issue political, background of economy of Vietnam is the way to the further boost the economic growth and development of Vietnam. Three special key economic zones were set up throughout the country and categorized into three different types of economic zone: industrial parks (IPS), export processing zones (EPZs), and economic zone (EZs). These special economic zones are located in the north, central, and south regions of Vietnam, where each zone has its own specialized industries for the industrial developers. Vietnam is one of the rising developing Asian countries, as many opportunities are present for foreign business ventures and investors with plans of doing business in the country.
Next is issue economic. Vietnam is faced with various challenges to rebuild its country after the war. These include challenges and threats from a political and socio-economic point of view. External threats come from countries near Vietnam and adhere to pro-democracy ideology. To overcome the problem, Vietnam took action by invading Cambodia in 1978 before receiving internal pressure. From an internal aspect, after that, Vietnam is faced with various socio-economic problems as well as several disruptions due to war. Thus, Vietnam had to formulate various policies and programs to restore a country's economy. In 1986, Vietnam launched the Doi Moi policy, which became the starting point for the country's rapid development. Next is a background social. In Vietnam, traditional society, a typical family has 3 or 4 generations living under the same roof. With the view of more children or more fortunate, many families want to have lot of children and grandchildren. Influenced by Confucianism and the feudal view of male preference, men play the most important role in the family and always have a final say. Feudal ethics shame women around. 3 obedience or 4 virtues. 3 obedient, which is obedient to their father during childhood, to their husband when married, and to their son in widowhood. 4 virtues: diligence, good manner, proper speech, and morality. Next is issue social. There are no freely elected national leaders. Political opposition is suppressed. All religious activity is controlled by the CPV, and dissent is not permitted, and civil rights are curtailed. Election in Vietnam occurred under a single-party authoritarian political system. Vietnam is among the few contemporary party-led dictatorship to not hold any direct election at the national level.
Next is the background culture in Vietnam. Part of the East culture sphere, Vietnamese culture has been certain characteristic features including ancestor veneration and worship, respect for community and family values, and manual labor religious belief. Important cultural symbols include four holy animals like dragons, turtle, phoenix, and unicorn. The national flower is lotus, and the most popular plant in Vietnam is bamboo. Vietnam is a multi-ethnic country with over 50 distinct groups. Each of them has its own language, lifestyle, and cultural heritage. Social belief and custom in Vietnam is family very strong in Vietnam. Family are valued over individual. Vietnam food is fresh and healthy and getting more and more popular over the world. The issue culture in Vietnam. Challenges in cultural globalization as a process through which cultures have become increasingly integrated and interdependent. Globalization poses a threat to Vietnam's cultural identity if the country fails to boost its internal power and uphold its traditional cultural values. Globalization requires Vietnam to well regulate the relationship between protecting national culture's values and absorbing the cultural essence of humanity to strengthen its internal power to stay immune against cultural invasion from overseas, to well handle the relationship between tradition and modernity, nationalism and internationalism, as well as settled cultural conflict arising in the process of industrialization, urbanization, and globalization. Lastly is the conclusion about the Vietnam. Hanoi, Vietnam, Gamuda Land continues to be recognized as one of the best urban development companies throughout its 10-year involvement in Vietnam despite having to face the challenges of policy and cultural difference in the country. The success also opens up opportunities for the company to set foot in overseas markets such as Vietnam. In addition to existing international projects such as Singapore and Australia, where the three countries contribute two-thirds to Gamuda Land sales.